Megan, my girl, my friend, you beautiful ray of light to this world. I am so damn happy that in this season of life and all that you got going on, all that we all got going on, that you took a micro beat, you said yes, and you pulled up a seat to this kitchen table conversation. Thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. Thank you for reaching out to me. And yeah, I mean, these conversations are so uplifting for me. So
Mm,
it's actually come at a wonderful time. It's sort of a during a season of my life that's been more challenging than others. I welcome this. So thank you for finding me.
God, I love that. So speaking of uplifting and what you look for, you find, and all of these things. So I was thinking about you last night, my sister. I was driving home, and one of my favorite things to do is my car has become my therapy. So whether I
Mm.
need to sit in silence to process what's happening in my anxiety ridden mind and body, or whether that is listening to something. So last night I was driving home and I have the master class app on my phone. And so I thought, let me pull up a little seat to masterclass. And so I pulled up a conversation with Judy Bloom. Do you remember Judy Bloom?
Of course. Oh my
Oh,
gosh.
are you there?
Are you
What's it?
there? It's me. Were you
Yes.
there? God, it's me, Margaret. Yeah.
Yes.
The first book I read where I was like, wait, is there something sexual happening? What is this? What's
What
going
is
on?
this?
Like,
Yes.
yeah.
What is it?
What's
Yes.
happening in my body?
What?
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So Judy Bloom sitting in the car beside me, we're having this beautiful conversation. And Megan, she had talked about as a young girl having all of this anxiety and how it processed for her as if I get 100% on this test, it will fix the things in my family. And it made me flash to you and this beautiful, real conversation that you and I had when we had first met, and you were talking about your own anxiety as a kid, not having the language, and how that morphed into perfectionism. Can you share that with us and our
Sure.
tribe?
Yes, of course. Well, I think this is something that many of us go through and only understand retrospectively.
Mm,
And I think nowadays, there's more language for mental health or mental health challenges and disorders. But growing up for me, I didn't know that what I was dealing with was anxiety,
mm,
and at times depression. But I did know that I had terrible nightmares and I felt really scared all the time. And really, I probably wouldn't have said on edge, but like something bad was going to happen frequently. And I uh, was absolutely terrified of failure, like truly
mm,
terrified of it. And it's so sad when I look back because there were so many things I didn't do because I was afraid of failing. And I remember, being, gosh, probably in grade 12. I'm Canadian, by the way, so we say grade 12 as opposed to 12th grade. And kind of like reflecting, being like, oh gosh, like, I was athlete of the year and valedictorian, and I had never really like, I thought that I'd never failed at anything
mm,
really. I was just so successful. But the truth was, I'd only done the things I knew I would be successful in.
mm,
If there was something that I tried that I wasn't good at, like piano or math, or I mean, tennis was my sport, and I had scholarships to schools in the States, but then I double faulted on match point in my provincial championship. And I was like, I'm never playing tennis again,
mm,
rather than, and actually the reason that I double faulted was because I never practiced my serve because I was bad at my serve. But because I was
mm,
bad at it, I was like, I'm not going to do this. So anything that I was bad at, I stayed away from. And I was just absolutely petrified of, I mean, I remember, coming home and absolutely in tears because I got 19 out of 20 on a spelling test,
mm,
for the first time that year. And it's not that, I mean, I certainly don't recall having explicit pressure put on me, but I do think school was a place where I felt some sense of control.
mm,
And there was a lot of stuff happening in my family at the time. And I think, yeah, there was a part of me that hoped that, if I was like the perfect child in these ways, then that would somehow make things more harmonious.
mm,
Now, it's a bit fuzzy and we're kind of just going off the cuff here. So I don't really have an
Yep.
answer prepared for this question. But I do think that that began to sort of evolve in its form for me as
Mm.
I got older. I had always been very fixated on diet and weight. That's something that I think growing up, I'm 38 now, so I was born in 86, and
Mhm.
the 80s and early 90s were definitely times where low fat, fat free, everything was all over
Mhm.
the place. And, my mom very much embraced that trend. And I have memories of her really like stepping on the scale and off the scale and on the scale and off the scale. And she was very petite, but, was always kind of concerned about things being fat free or low fat or losing weight and whatnot. She never put any pressure on me about my body. But of course, as kids, you modeled that behavior. So I remember beginning dieting like when I was like 9, being like, okay, I'm gonna like start only eating this or not eat that, and kind of skipping meals. And that eventually transformed into bulimia. So I was bulimic in high school, which is when you binge and purge. There are other forms of bulimia as well, using laxatives or diabulimia, kind of messing with your insulin and stuff if you're diabetic. But or overexercising is another way that people will purge. But I binged and purged in the kind of traditional way. I would eat a lot, make myself throw up. Um, and that sort of served a couple of purposes. One, there was sort of this self-soothing that came through it
Mm.
because I hadn't learned how to self-soothe. But then there was also sort of like a release. And, we know now that purging releases endorphins. And was sort of this like very kind of mindful, ritualistic kind of space for me to just numb myself from all
Mm.
that I had going on at home, within myself. Again, the depression, the anxiety that I was navigating. And but there were other forms that this perfectionism took from me. I mean, some might say that self-sabotage is actually a form of perfectionism because,
Mm.
it doesn't allow us to sit with that vulnerability of potential failure. And really, what perfectionism is it's an inability to be with emotional discomfort, hyper self-critical inner voice, unrealistically high, inflexible expectations. So, doesn't matter if you're sick or if you didn't sleep the night before, or if you have your period or whatever it is. It's like you are still expecting the same
Mm.
from yourself that you would when you're at your best, or from that person on Instagram, and how they're performing, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And so all of those factors kind of together, plus self-worth that's really dependent on like outcomes and achievements and appearance, all that kind of stuff is really sort of like the constellation of perfectionism. So a lot of times people think perfectionism is about like truly being perfect or never screwing up. And in some cases it is because perfection really has a lot to do with avoidance. So, we're trying to
Mm.
avoid those uncomfortable feelings. And one of the ways that we'll do that is by really like overcompensating to the point at which failure is not a possibility or an option. But it also means, yeah, avoiding things where there's vulnerability. And the problem is perfectionism prevents us from growing, because in order to grow we have to kind of
Mm.
fail in some ways. We have to struggle, we have to create that scaffolding zone where we like learn a new skill. So, even things like going on podcasts, like there
Yeah.
was a period for me, and I'm sure for you as well, and still to this day, I mean, there's like a level of nerves, right? Like, ooh, like, did I
Yeah.
just say too much? What are people going to think? Oh my gosh.
Yep.
But the more we do it, the more we work that muscle, and that's the same thing for any new skill that we gain. So yeah, I would say like my perfectionism started quite young, and it really kind of kept transforming and transforming until I was actually, gosh, I was 24. And at that point, my bulimia had transformed into more anorexia, orthorexia. So I'd stopped binging and purging, but I was still being like hyper restrictive. I was ironically finishing my master's in psychology, in like a super prestigious program as like one of the youngest or the youngest person by many years. And on the side, I was also working as a personal trainer at a gym and like really restrictive. And I like thought that I kind of had it all together, but I was like riddled with anxiety, like
Mm.
truly in a very, very bad mental health state. And, on some level, either conscious or unconscious, I believed that if I was thin, and if I was successful and if I was smart and if I was all of these things, then I could somehow prevent what had happened to my mom from happening to me, which was my dad had an affair and left her, and it was really destructive to our family on a number of levels. And as I say that, I also want to honor that, like, that was my dad's, he needed to do that for himself. And, I don't think their marriage was
Mhm.
super great or anything like that. So it wasn't all on
Mhm.
him, the blame, but it did have a really negative impact on our family and particularly on my mom's mental health. And so I thought, okay, if I am able to like do all of these things, then I can stop myself from being destroyed and heartbroken like mom was.
Mm,
And the best thing in my life happened to me looking back. At the time, it felt fucking terrible, but my boyfriend of 3 years at the time, who I totally thought I was going to marry,
mhm,
he broke up with me. And I don't blame him because I was a fucking head case. I know that's not probably a very PC term to come from a therapist, but I was not in a good space and I'm sure I
mhm,
did not treat him well. Um, and he broke up with me and I hit rock bottom. And I was like,
mm,
wait, hold on. Like, I was told, not really told, but told by the media, at that time there was no Instagram, but, I was told by like the people around me that I look up to, in some implicit or explicit way, and by movies and books and all this stuff, that if I'm like young and thin and beautiful and smart and I have a good job and I have a master's degree and
mm,
all of these sorts of things, then nobody will leave me. I will be able to protect myself from pain. But what I learned was that you can't fucking protect yourself from pain. Pain,
mm,
as I think, who is it? Susan, I can't remember her last name, but it's like pain is the price we pay at being human. It's like kind of like
mm,
the ticket, the cost of the ticket to be here, right? And I went deep into a place of pain that I'd never allowed myself to feel before because I'd never allowed myself to actually break in that way. But as anyone here who's been heartbroken knows, heartbreak is an unavoidable pain that
mm,
yeah, is, as I like to say, some spiritual shit.
mm,
So alongside that, in addition to that, I at the time had been over exercising so much as sort of a form of my eating disorders, that I had so many injuries that my physical therapist said, you cannot run anymore, you cannot work out
mm,
anymore, the only thing you can do is yoga, that's the only thing I'll allow you to do. And I like begrudgingly, went and started doing yoga, not liking it because it was boring and uncomfortable and stretching and didn't burn calories and made me have to think and like all of those sorts of things. I had to be with my feelings. But ultimately, I started really experiencing healing, both on a physical level in terms
mm,
of my body healing, but also on an emotional level. I started sleeping for the first time in my life. Tears, fell from my eyes in this yoga room in a way that I'd never allowed myself to before. And so there was this sort of like beautiful confluence of events where I really do believe there was some form of like, divine universal intervention where I had this like shattering heartbreak and kind of world turned upside down. And at the same time, like found myself in more of like a yogic community. I also discovered Buddhism at that time and started
mm,
like really reading and studying a lot of Buddhist philosophy. Um, and started to really understand like, oh shit, I guess like the goal here isn't to avoid pain, it's to learn how to be with it.
mm,
And that, of course, is simple but not easy, right? Like, oh, okay, all I have to do to be resilient in this world, to like fear less, to have less shame, is to like learn how to be with my emotions. Cool. Now, that's a Herculean effort for those of us who've never really learned how to cope with our difficult emotions growing up. For me, again, it was all about avoidance or in many cases numbing, in the form of, disordered eating for me, but also in other forms. I mean, it's so easy for us to numb as humans, right? So, and I think that's largely what I work on with my clients today. But just to kind of like, speed up, I guess, the rest of the story until today, a beautiful thing was that another area where I was being deeply humbled was after 7 years of education and like a very prestigious master's program in clinical placement, I couldn't find a job at this time. So I
mm,
was heartbroken, I was healing my broken body, and I was unemployed. And I was like, holy shit, like this is a deep place of humbling. And I was living in Vancouver, British Columbia at the time, and I like truly couldn't afford to live,
mm,
let alone afford to do yoga, because yoga is expensive. And so I was like,
mhm,
maybe I'll, in addition to the many other part-time jobs I'm getting, I'll get a job at the yoga studio. So I actually got a part-time job at a yoga studio with my master's degree, working for like $12 an hour and just like laying out mats for people and checking people in. But I got free yoga and that really helped me can kind of continue with this. But in the process of that, I started writing for the yoga studio's blog, just sharing a bit about my experience. And from that, I had a couple of other larger publications reach out to me. I started writing for them, yada yada yada, a little bit here, but ultimately I ended up in New York City. Now, before that, I did work at a college in Canada for a few years in their student mental health center and student health and counseling center. And at that time, I kind of realized like, wow, here I am now implementing all of this work into that I've done into helping students and individuals learn how to be with their discomfort. But I'm now living a pretty comfortable life. I had a faculty position. I was playing soccer a few times a week, like with my all of my friends, and had my friends from like my hometown and from university and from my master's. And I was super, super comfortable. And I realized I was like, you know what? I had fallen in love with New York from, some other experiences going there. And I had this opportunity to go there and to kind of pursue something bigger in my mind. And so I was like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to do this.
Mm,
And it was actually because of like, working at that yoga studio that I ultimately ended up finding my way into New York City. So I was in there for the last 10 years. I just moved to Nashville within the last year. And, since then, I've really tried to practice what I preach, both
mm,
working with clients, individuals from all backgrounds, but mostly entrepreneurs and high performers around helping them prevent perfectionism from getting in the way of, both following their dreams and having a really positive relationship to themselves and, their
mm,
mental health. And then also I try to challenge myself to step out of my own comfort zone and,
mm.
create content just like you and also like, be present and not give in to the desire to be a total workaholic and actually be here for life and not constantly look around at what everybody else is doing on social media and be like, I'm not doing enough. So
Mm.
anyway, that's was a very, very long introduction to kind of the perfectionism that started as a child and where I am today. But I figured you might have asked that question anyway. So here we are.
Girl, you are taking me to church. I got a legal pad in front of me here. And as you were talking, I'm like, felt that, felt that, never had the words for that, felt that.
Uh,
And I think there is so much power, and this is hard as fuck. And you are doing it um to serve the person that you once were and that you needed to heal.
I love that framing. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think that's how so many of us can find meaning in our suffering, right? Is like, hey, here's this thing that I went through, or here's this journey that I went on. And like, I wish I'd had someone like me there to be like, hey, like, you're not alone. And
Mm,
listen, like, we need to be met where we're at. Like, even if I went back to where I was at 24 or 25 or whatever, and was like, hey, this is all you need to do, and da 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 da, and tell me all the intellectual, like, I still would have had to go on my journey, right?
yeah.
Like, it's not just a switch that gets flipped when we hear, the thing in the cognitive, right? We have to really experientially learn and come to know like what we know now. But
Mm,
either way, what I think really is at the root of most people's, perfectionism or addictions or depression or anxiety or OCD or relational issues, like whatever it is shame. And so
mm,
one thing that we can do when we share our stories, and that's why I try to be quite open about even things like bulimia, which has so much shame around it,
mm,
right? Because when we hear other people sharing something similar, we feel less alone and we feel less shame. So I
yeah.
think it's just so important to share those stories and the messy parts too.
Girl, preach. Meg, as you were talking, you had said so much that spoke to me, and I want to talk about learning how to be with the pain. When you were talking about what you inherited from your mother regarding your body image, I was flashing to not only the body talk from my own mother, but also how my mom doesn't like any sort of conflict. And
Mm,
so she'll buy it even if it's not her thing and try to fix it. And girl,
uh,
that's me. I just had a conversation
yeah.
last night with a girlfriend about this.
Mhm.
Someone was upset with me and I finally dealt with the conversation and she was like, "What'd you do, Meg? Did you say, I'm sorry, let me fix it, even though you have nothing to be sorry for, but you bought their emotions?" And I was like, "Yeah, I did." And so I want to ask you, Meg, how, what tools do you share? What have you done? What do you share with your tribe on how to sit in the pain, how not to numb it, how not to gloss it over, how
Yeah.
not to try to buy other people's opinions of you and then try to fix it and then the shame that comes with that? Any recommendations?
Yeah, definitely. So, first of all, I can very much relate to that urge to fix, right? And
Yeah.
to, have a value for harmony and, being conflict avoidant. I think also particularly for women, right? Like we are seen as relational beings. We're seen as kind of the menders, the people pleasers, the glue in relationships or families. And so when we dare have needs that like oppose someone else's, we're
Mm,
seen as too bitchy or too aggressive or selfish or any of those things. And I think like many women and probably like yourself as well, deal with that honestly daily, that war of like, do I stand up for myself? Like,
Mm.
it's going to make other people uncomfortable. Do I assert my needs? Right. This is something I just got married a couple months ago. And of course, we've been in a relationship for a long time, but it's a whole other, ball game in a marriage being like,
Mm.
okay, there are two people here and sometimes more, whose needs are important and that I have to
Mhm.
consider. Like, when do I advocate for myself and when do I acquiesce and what does compromise look like and all of those things? So, first of all, just saying I can very much relate to all of that. And I think a lot of women especially can as well. I think the first thing that is super important to do, really in any kind of situation where we're noticing a difficult emotion, is to first of all recognize what the emotion is and what it is trying to tell us. So I'm assuming that those people who might be learning how to sit with a difficult emotion at least now have the awareness of being like, oh, there's something I'm trying to avoid, right? Like, that's the
Mm.
hardest part. Literally, the hardest part is gaining awareness that we're trying to avoid something. So that is like, once we have that knowledge, like, oh, interesting, there's something happening in my body that I don't like right now, or like I'm feeling this urge to go to, the TV or the fridge or my phone
Mm.
or, whatever your kind of vices, the wine, the weed, like, which by the way, it's never actually about the substance itself or the kind of coping mechanism itself. It's our relationship to it, right? So there, I believe there is absolutely a place for all of those things, right? I don't believe in, being super for me personally, like dogmatic or restrictive about any type of, substance unless we really do have a deeply unhealthy relationship to it. But the first thing is, yes, being like, okay, I'm noticing I'm trying to avoid something or I'm trying to numb something, right?
Mm.
Which is essentially the same thing. But avoidance, when I talk about that, mean more like I don't want to go do the thing because I'm going to maybe feel that feeling. So that's more where
Yes.
that perfectionism comes in, as opposed to numbing is like, oh, I'm having it right now. Like, let me just like kind of, put some water on it or whatever.
Yeah.
In IFS, if you're familiar with internal family systems, we talk about the protective parts and we talk about managers and firefighters. And managers are the ones where it's like, okay, I'm going to manage this by avoiding the difficult feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the firefighter's like, I'm feeling it. Like, let's put it out by any, whatever means necessary. So first noticing like, okay, I'm trying to avoid something. Now, the next thing is most of us as humans, men especially, actually have a lot of shame around difficult emotions or emotions that are
Mm.
not either like happiness, or men are kind of more okay with feeling anger. Women have more shame around feeling anger, but men feel more shame around feeling like anxious or lonely because they're seen as like weak and vulnerable. So the next thing is recognizing like, okay, our difficult emotions are actually serving an evolutionary purpose. Like,
Mm.
we as a human race, if you do believe in evolution, would not have survived and would not have proliferated if it weren't for difficult emotions. I mean, they are genuinely there for survival. So I'll give you some examples. First of all, something like anxiety is a very straightforward one, right? Like, anxiety is there to say like, hey, watch out or prepare for something. So
Mm-hmm.
if you're like on the savannah and the saber-toothed tiger is coming toward you, like, you want to feel anxiety because it's going to make you move, right? Or similarly, like, in modern day, let's say you're walking home from the bar late at night and like you can take the shortcut down the dark alley, or you
Yeah.
can take the long way home that's well lit. You start walking down the dark alley, feel a little bit of anxiety. That's helpful. That is for survival, right? Now, on another conversation or a side tangent is that today we feel more chronic anxiety than we should. So we're more in that like fight or flight state, in a chronic state, and that is not good for us. That is what kind of like is hard on our heart and our sleep and like really not good for our health. And, all of those things that happen in like the more short-term fight or flight state, such as like, our blood kind of clotting more quickly or whatever the term is. Not, I don't know if it's clotting, but like whatever. There's all these things that happen. Your heart rate speeds
Yeah.
up, your breathing gets faster, you get kind of sweaty, your blood drains from your prefrontal cortex and goes to your large muscle groups getting ready to run. And all of those things are really pro-evolutionary. However, they're not in a more chronic state. But just going back to anxiety for a moment, that is an emotion that is there for survival. It is like either watch out, prepare, that kind of thing. Now, emotions are there for both survival and for belonging, because belonging is part of survival. So we need to belong and we need to be in groups. Emotions are what we call pro-social. We need to be in groups to be able to survive as human beings. So that's where this is the more kind of complex ones. Like, okay, guilt. Guilt is actually a really healthy emotion, because at least when it's being felt from a warranted place, which it isn't always, but when it's being felt from a warranted place, it says, hey, there is a relationship that you care about where there's a rupture here and you need to do
Mm.
something to prepare. You've maybe done something that's hurt someone's feelings or crossed a boundary or mistreated someone. And in order for you to maintain that bond, you should feel some guilt so that you can repair. Loneliness is like, hey, you want to connect. You want to connect with people, go be around people, be in the group, right? And
Yeah.
again, like if we were not in groups, we would be by ourselves and we would probably, either be like killed by an animal or we'd starve to death or we'd freeze to death. And most importantly, we definitely wouldn't procreate, right? So like again, the in groups is really, really important. We historically lived in groups and tribes. And that's one of the unfortunate things about our society today is that we don't live in groups enough and we are very isolated. And that's a huge part of the mental health crisis that we're in right now. So we talked about anxiety, we talked about guilt, we talked about loneliness. Let's look at anger for a moment. Anger is there to say, hey, you've been mistreated or a boundary's been crossed, or maybe you
Mm.
need to advocate for someone or something. And maybe there's an injustice that's occurred. So that's again where anger in its righteous form is a really healthy emotion. Now, again, anger is one that can show up in what is what we call a secondary emotion. So if a person is feeling something like anger, or excuse me, if they're feeling like anxiety or powerlessness or hurt, and that feels just a little too vulnerable, sometimes that sublimates into anger. And so anger is one that we want to be a little bit more curious about. Be like, okay, am I actually feeling anger right now? Or am I feeling something a little deeper and more vulnerable? But anger is a way of me feeling it in a way that it feels safer for me or more in
Mm.
control. So we could basically go through all of the emotions and find their evolutionary purpose. So, but the reason I share all this is because the first thing a person can do when they're recognizing their emotion is try to alleviate the shame of having the emotion by being like,
Mm.
okay, this makes sense. This is very human to have this emotion. What's coming up here? Anyone else in my shoes might be feeling this.
Mm.
What is it that's going on? And what is this trying to tell me? Is it this guilt here because it's telling me that, hey, like I actually am doing something that's not within my integrity or something that's kind of hurting a relationship I care about?
Mm.
Or is this guilt because like I'm a woman in this world who's been told that I should put everyone else before me? And,
Mm.
if I put myself first, then I am, committing some kind of moral failing. So
Mm.
so the first thing, once we recognize the emotion, is to essentially give ourselves permission to feel it. And that is what prevents us from feeling shame around having that emotion. Now, there
Mm.
are again places, this is where it's kind of complex. There are places where shame actually is a healthy emotion as well, right? Like we do want to feel shame when we're doing something that isn't pro-social,
Mm.
that isn't helpful for us, having a sense of belonging, right? And what shame does is it kind of says like, hey, like go hide for a little bit, figure out what that is that you got going on, and then come back to the group.
Wow.
But most of the time now, when we're feeling shame, it is not in its healthy form, similar to anxiety, right? Most of the time when we're feeling shame, it's because we've looked at Instagram or TikTok or whatever, and
Mm.
we're like, shit, like I'm not young anymore. I'm not skinny
Um,
anymore. I'm not like putting out as much content as that person is, or I'm not as rich as they are, or, my relationship's not as perfect as theirs is, or I don't travel as much as they do, or whatever, right? So it's often coming from comparison to either something that we
mm.
see or something that we believe we should be. So again, coming back to that, how do we sit with our difficult emotions? Recognize the emotion, then give yourself permission to feel it. And then this is already part of self-compassion, giving yourself permission to feel it, but really validate yourself. Say something that you would say to a friend. I
Mm.
love like the self-empathy sentence starter of it's understandable you're feeling whatever you're feeling for whatever reason you're feeling it. So let's say if I was like, yeah, I wake up and the first thing I do is look at my phone, which is probably not the best thing, right? And I look at Instagram and I see something that makes me feel like shit about myself, you know, taking a moment, being like, okay, what am I feeling right now? All right, I'm feeling really, maybe discouraged or defeated. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling unlovable,
Yeah.
or undesirable, okay. I'm feeling some shame, it seems like. Okay, Meg, hey, sweet girl. I love to like throw in a little sweet
Yeah.
girl or, honey or sweetheart or babe or girl. Um, it seems like you're feeling, or it looks like it sounds like you're feeling um that you're not good enough,
Mm.
and that's obviously not a feeling, but like, kind of just acknowledging like, oh, it's understandable that you're feeling discouraged this morning. It's understandable that you're feeling overwhelmed because like you just woke up and you looked at something that made you feel like you were failing in every single area. And now you feel like you have to fix every area of your life. And like, that's really fucking overwhelming. Right. And so like, or more timely for me right now. And, part of the reason I'm in a difficult season is I lost my mom suddenly,
Yeah.
almost 6 months ago now. And had a wedding a few months after that. And it's been a pretty intense
Mm.
journey. And
Yeah.
I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, but I do not have the capacity that I normally do. And so I have to practice a lot of self-compassion right now. It's understandable that you're having trouble concentrating. It's understandable that you're feeling tired, frustrated,
Mm.
lonely, guilty, regretful, any of these things that we experience when we have grief or that many of us
Yeah.
experience. So the self-compassion is the next piece in that moment. And then I would go to either some form of either auto-regulation or co-regulation. So that means either like self-soothing or soothing through connection. And for me,
Mm,
self-soothing takes many different forms. I mean, self-compassion is certainly part of that, but it's like, do I want to go for a walk and listen to music? Do I want to, um, go get, if I have, access to it, go get a massage or a pedicure or get my eyebrows done or, go out and run an errand. I have to, go return something from Revolve
mm,
or whatever it is, like something I can check off my list to feel a little better. Do I want to bake something? Do I want to watch something? Like, what can I do in this moment to help regulate my nervous system? And there's an endless, I mean, yoga, sort of being able to do yoga at any moment is one that is helpful for me. I just use the Peloton app and do like a quick yoga if I can.
mm-hmm.
Always have a mat just like lay it out so I don't even have to unroll it. There's tons of other kind of like ways of getting into our bodies or breath work or, meditation for some people. That's not one. Yoga is my meditation. I don't find kind of sitting meditation is super helpful for me. But there's kind of, okay, do I want to do that or do I want to co-regulate? Does that mean calling a friend or texting somebody
Mm,
or journaling? I have a girlfriend that I journal to. We journal back and forth or we leave voice notes back and forth to each other. Or call my therapist and make an appointment if I don't
yeah.
have one on the calendar already, or go to acupuncture, or there's sort of a whole list of things that kind of involve that co-regulation piece. I know for
Yeah.
me with my husband, so I'm saying like, hey babe, can we talk? Can I just talk about it? And he's really good at being like, do you want me to just listen or do you want solutions?
Yeah.
And men usually want to give solutions. So oftentimes we have to say like, hey, I just want, you to listen and give me empathy or just hold my hand or, just let me lay in your arms while I talk about these things or whatever. So that I guess to give people sort of the flow, I would be like, recognize the difficult emotion, give yourself permission for feeling it and recognize what it is and what it's trying to tell you. Say something that you would say to, a friend or loved one, something self-compassionate, and then some form of like self-soothing. And then also like if the emotion itself really has wisdom in it, like if it's like, oh shit, like I should be feeling guilty because I did
Mm,
do something, or I should be feeling angry because I do need to advocate myself, then we want to take action in a way that is going to help us like either make the emotion go away, or in some cases, we just need to sit with that until it dissipates and recognize there's
yeah.
something it's out of our control.
God, I love that. Meg, you were saying so many things that I was like, yeah, I feel that. And when you broke down the feeling it, for me, that has been pen to paper, the best form of therapy.
Yes.
And I truly believe you don't even need to like it. You don't need to be a writer. It is
Yeah.
who you get to know because the pen doesn't judge and it is a safe space.
Totally. I love
Right.
that.
And I
Yeah.
always feel like when I get feel the gremlins coming and
Mm,
all of it, to release it to pen to paper, the freedom in it. But then I loved when you also said, validating yourself for it. And then the third approach, really understanding, do I need to do something for me from a self-soothing mechanism, whether that is, for me, Megan, that's looked like 15 minutes of walking our fur kid
yeah.
Stella outside with no phone
Mm,
to hear myself.
yeah.
Or, and this is the other thing I've had to be very much aware of, Megan, because I am a self-isolator
Yes.
and a self fixer. And I think I got it. I'm fine. I don't need to talk to anybody.
Yeah.
So the awareness piece to pick up the phone. And
Totally.
as you were just talking about that, I flashed to, oh my God, yes, last night after I called my girlfriend, someone who was a safe space for me and had an 8-minute conversation with her, rolling out what was happening with this person that was upset to me.
Mm,
I felt freedom in it and clarity. And so God,
mm.
all of that is just so relatable. Thank you for that.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you. And I think again, you brought up such a good point about knowing like, okay, sometimes there's what we have our instinct to do in those moments, and there's what we really know is probably what we need. And that takes like some next level emotional
Bullshit.
intelligence to be able to do that, right? Like,
Yeah.
because yeah, and I think so many people can relate. Like, we just sometimes want to go into those like dark holes and hide, and that's oftentimes shame talking, or I don't want to share
Yes.
this because what will people think? Or like, you can solve this on your own, or don't bother people, don't be a burden. But like, the reality is people love to be helpful for the most part, unless they're overextended, and don't have any capacity. Most people, I mean, that's what friendship is about, right? It's like
Yeah.
supporting each other, especially women friendship, which is
Oh,
beautiful because that allows for us to have vulnerability and intimacy that unfortunately a lot of men don't get, and they're much lonelier as a result. So knowing like, okay, I want to isolate in this moment, but I actually think probably what I need is to reach out. And I will offer to people as well. Like if that feels like too much and you're like, I just don't want to shine a light on what I'm going through, sometimes just reaching out to a friend and being like, hey, I'm having a rough day. Or I'm going through something. I don't want to talk about it yet, but I just really do feel like I need to hear your voice and I need to connect. Can we talk about you? Or can we talk about something else? Or can
Mm.
we keep things like light or whatever it is? And oftentimes that will allow us to then go into the thing that's bothering us. But sometimes just even having that, like I can literally feel with my best girlfriends, like the oxytocin like surging through my veins when I like hear their voice. I'm like, okay, okay, I'm calm now. Like I can
Yeah.
feel it in my chest. I can feel it in my body. And so yeah, just you don't feel like when you call somebody, it has to be like, oh, this confessional of like, okay, we're going to go into all the hard stuff and I'm going to tell them exactly what I'm going through because sometimes that can feel a little bit too intense and like you're kind of like, I don't know, like you're standing too close to the bonfire type thing. But it's like, okay, let's just connect on something that feels a little less threatening or a little less confronting and see if that allows you to feel a little bit better.
Megan, as you were just talking about the warm blanket that gets wrapped around you when you share it with a trusted tribe, or when you're with a trusted tribe, Megan, it just made me flash when I think about these micro moment decisions that we make as we're all so busy, all juggling all of the things.
Yeah,
Overwhelm shit is real for everybody, regardless of what you see.
totally.
Um, is the gift in doing a voice memo. I started doing voice memos.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah. And just to
totally.
hear someone's voice is a really beautiful gift.
Hmm.
Megan, I want to ask you because you had shared something when you and I had first sat across the screen from each other and had a beautiful conversation. And I was like, oh, fuck, yes. The secret sauce to compassion. And you had talked about the power of trust, the power of faith, and you don't crumble when you have it.
Yes. So I would imagine I'm like, I can't exactly recall what I said, but I imagine probably what I was talking about was really like trust and faith in ourselves, right?
Mm,
This is a very non-denominational perspective. I mean, I think for those who do have like a religious or spiritual belief, sometimes it can be easier because there is sort of a surrendering and like, okay, this is part of God's plan or part of the universe's plan or whatever. I would say I probably fall into the camp of like, there's something universal here,
yeah.
like this is all kind of unfolding as it's supposed to. Um, However, even if that doesn't resonate for you, we can trust in our resilience, right? Like we can
Mm,
trust that, okay, like, yeah, as I said earlier in our conversation, really the only thing that we can guarantee in life is pain, right? Like there are no guarantees and life is not fair. And it's not like we all get the same ride or journey here. And that's why I think it's
mm,
super important that we're all aware of our privilege and, have moments to sit with the gratitude of all that we do have. And that said, life is filled with sudden loss, or heartbreak or anxiety or physical pain, and all sorts of things that make it challenging, and also beautiful. There's nothing really to compare it to. And so, really, rather than trying to like avoid bad things happening, which is how a lot of us live our lives, right? That's what anxiety does, is kind of says like, avoid this or this, something that's going to happen. Or, if you can kind of orchestrate your life in this type of way, then you can prevent yourself from feeling pain. Well, no, instead, if you look at it through, I guess, a more Buddhist lens, it would say, like, yeah, I mean, it's not that we go seeking pain, of course
mm,
not, but pain is really just an inevitable part of being human. And
yeah.
so it's not about trying to avoid that, it's learning how to become resilient to it and trusting, like, okay, we have all, again, I mean, this may not apply to everyone because I think, for those who perhaps are at a stage of life where they are in so much like chronic physical pain, for example, or, are at a stage of life where they're really like losing everyone around them. I think it's sort of audacious for me to say that a person can come back from that and like feel a lot better. And I, again, as a Canadian, I definitely believe in, MAID and sort of medically assisted intentional dying when a person, needs that
Hmm.
for themselves. But for the most part, without that subset of people, there is almost always hope for, a better life and things improving and things kind of returning to a place of balance or love or harmony or stability. And so the more we kind of learn through chapters of challenge or grief or
Mm,
difficulty or whatever, disarray, oh, okay, like things come together and fall apart. That's my email signature as a Pema Chodron quote, right? Like things come together and fall apart, then they come together and fall apart again. And really, I'm paraphrasing now because I don't know the quote off by heart, but it's essentially that like, the idea is not necessarily to try to avoid that, but to really like make room for the heartbreak, the despair,
Mm,
the guilt, the anxiety, all of that. And so, the trust piece that I'm talking about is not about like trusting everything's going to be perfect or okay or anything like that. It's trusting that, like, yeah, you are resilient, you are resourced. I mean, and as we get older, we get wiser. We learn better how to handle this stuff. We become so much more self-aware just in the
yeah.
way that you recognize, like, oh, I didn't want to call a friend, but it's what I needed to do, right?
Yeah.
For me, I just had an experience where I was like, you know what, I didn't want to say no to this thing, but I know it's what I needed to do. And now that I've said no, I feel a lot of relief and I know it's the right thing for me. And so as we get older and as we become more self-aware, we really learn what we need. And so
Mm,
the trust piece is not, oh, everything's going to be perfect. It's, yeah, everything's not going to be perfect. And things are going to be crunchy and messy at times.
mm,
And I'm going to have conflict and I'm going to have pain and all those things. And I have the tools and the resources, both internally and externally. So
mm,
internally, meaning I have my wisdom and my intelligence and my humor and my creativity and my, discipline or perseverance. Externally, I have resources like, I have money and I have, friends and I have a husband and I have a cat and, I have healers around me and I have access to all of these things to help me feel better. So I will be able to ride out whatever storm comes my way,
mm.
until I can't. So I think that's kind of the trust piece is more the trust in oneself versus a trust in like, everything looking some sort of way.
God, I love that. Megan, as you're talking, I just had this flash to, and I'm going to send it to you when we're done here. And y'all, I'm going to link it in the show notes. Martha Beck did a podcast episode that I just heard. I guess she has this new book coming out on anxiety.
Oh, cool.
And she had said that the change cycles of life and how you can get so pissed off because you're like, why am I going through this? I thought I healed from
Right.
this. And like you can buck against it. But the power, as you just so beautifully said, when you can release that and rewire it and lean into it and think, what is the lesson here? And I'm coming into this with more resiliency and a toolkit that I didn't have before. And guess what? I'm going to learn from this. I'm going to survive. There is something on the other end of this because there always has been and there always will. The freedom in that.
Totally. Well, and also like, gosh, I mean, it's like imagine our lives if like everything went perfectly. Like it's like watching a movie where there's no struggle or challenge or growth or anything. Like in order to grow, we need to have challenge, right? That's
Mm,
why perfectionism prevents us from growing because it prevents us from ever kind of really challenging ourselves or stepping out of our comfort zones. And so if you were to I try to take a step back sometimes and be like, would I imagine my life any other way? There are
mm,
so many gifts in this. There's so many lessons, like you said. Like, what is kind of like the soul challenge? What is,
mm.
as Pema Chodron says again, nothing ever goes away until it teaches us what we need to know. So, what can I learn in this, right? And that's not meant to spiritually bypass. Like, there are a lot of, I think, in our, kind of the uh, pop psychology rhetoric out there. There is a lot of like oh, everything's happening for a reason and like, and sometimes that's not going to apply. And I think, we tend to intellectualize at times, especially if we perceive ourselves to be someone intellectual. Like we tend to intellectualize our feelings and like try to avoid them and be like, oh, it's okay, it's perfect. I mean, again, to use an
Mm,
example, like I can say all the things about losing my mom suddenly, 30 years before I expected to, or at least 20
yeah.
years before I expected to, I can say all the right things, right? I can say, okay, well, it's better that she didn't suffer. And,
Yeah.
this is just part of being human. And, at least I got as many years with her as I did. And like, I can say all those things. And those things are all true. But what's also true is it's excruciating, to
Mm,
lose a parent, I think, for anyone,
yeah.
especially when that parent is young, especially when it's unexpected, especially when you feel like you've been robbed of an entire chapter of your life where you needed your mom. And so I need to
Yeah.
also turn inward and be like, this is really fucking hard. And like
Yeah.
almost 6 months later, I still haven't really had a day without some tears, and that's normal, right? And
Yeah.
so I don't feel as though I'm failing because I'm having those feelings. And so I guess I just want to caveat the piece around like, yes, like the trust and kind of embracing life's pain as not meaning you don't feel it or you don't
Mm,
honor it. Like there is an accepting that, hey, these things are all happening and we can not fight that or not struggle against it. Another favorite saying of mine is pain times struggle equals suffering. So when we're like sort of struggling against it or fighting it or being like, this isn't fair, why did this happen to me?
yes.
Or I shouldn't feel this, that is what creates more suffering.
Mm,
But we're not trying to take away the pain. Like the pain has to move through us. That is part of our journey. We have to move it through and release it. I mean, I'm a huge fan of psychedelics used in an intentional way. I think that those are a beautiful way of moving stuck pain and trauma through our body and accessing feelings that we might not be able to access because we have so many defenses that keep ourselves shut down
yeah.
from them. But yeah, I just want to really clarify that like that kind of acceptance and trust in the process and acknowledgement of like life being painful is not meant to deny ourselves from actually honoring and feeling it and like recognizing how fucking hard it is because it
Mm,
is. And that's where we have to be extra sensitive and kind to ourselves in the same way we would to a child or what we needed as children. We needed a parent to be there and be like, hey, this is really hard. Like, I'm here for you. Let me hold you through
yeah.
this.
Megan, reason number 787 why I love you. Keeping shit real. Like, and it's can seem easy to say these things and share them when we're sitting across this kitchen table from each other having a moment and our beautiful tribe in this room, but it's another thing to fucking feel it. And I think
Totally.
so often in what we hear, we have this own shame language back to ourselves of like, why is everyone out? Why does it seem so easy for everyone else and it seems hard for me? And girl, I just appreciate your fucking realness.
Oh, thank you so much.
Megan, our girl, has a book out, How to Be Alone and Together. And girl, you had me salivating like Homer Simpson when I saw that because I think one of the hardest fucking things to do, but can give you so much clarity. And you beautifully broke it down for us earlier is being alone with your thoughts and allowing yourself to actually be alone. Can you tell us more about where we can find out more about this book, more where we can connect with you and the beautiful words and tribe that you are building out into this world?
Of course. Thank you so much, Megan. Thank you for having me today. As far as the book goes, you can find it on Amazon. And the subtitle is 72 Lessons on Being at Peace with Yourself, which is kind of just a little like there's just 72 little bite-sized kind of nuggets to read through. So it's something kind of like a bathroom reader. You can flip to any page and get just like a little nugget of wisdom. And yeah, the goal with that is really to help people learn how to be with themselves.
Mm,
Because yes, it is in that aloneness or that solitude that I think so much magic happens, that we know so much magic happens, that we develop a deeper relationship to ourselves, that we learn our needs and begin to honor them, that we process our grief or trauma or whatever it is, and that we recognize, like, yeah, okay, I deserve nurturing and soothing and
mm,
rest and all of those sorts of things, which again, especially for women, like it is so hard for us to be like, I'm just fucking tired and I just need to take care of myself, you
yes.
know? That feels so indulgent to say something like that, but we do deserve that, you know? And oftentimes we've created lives for ourselves where we feel so overwhelmed and we don't even know like how what we don't even know what we need, you know, let alone how we would possibly access it. So
Mm,
sort of having those moments of quiet with ourselves, which don't necessarily have to be, you know, a sitting meditation. I mean, that, as I said myself, I don't prefer meditation. I've done a lot of it and I've decided, you know, walks are much better for me. You know, that's meditative for me, right? And listening to music. But yes, so please, yeah, check out my book. You know, you can also follow me on Instagram at Megan J. Bruneau. That's MEGANJBRU. N as in Nancy, E as in Echo, A U. And yeah, you can email me at Megan at meganjbruneau.com. Sorry, excuse me, Megan at meganbruneau.com. Yeah, or follow me on LinkedIn or any of those sorts of things. I'm not yet on TikTok. I kind of have wondered if that's something that I'll like do or not. But again, I'm always kind of sensitive to capacity and trying to balance
mm,
like creating and also being. Um, so yeah, but I'd love to hear from you if you want to reach out, if you want to work with me, or I have a couple of other therapists and coaches on my team. And yeah, hopefully we'll be creating more beautiful things when the time is right.
thank you, my girl. Meg, thank you for making time for this today.
Oh
Thank
my
you
gosh,
for
thank you for having
showing
me.
up and thank you for being real.
Well, I appreciate you so much. I appreciate what you're doing, Meg. And thank you for everyone for listening and for committing to, yeah, just coming to know yourself better because
Mm,
it really is the greatest gift we can give ourselves.
Mic drop.
Yeah.